I'm Alex Jones. The story you're about to see is true. This is reality. Truth is stranger than fiction.
Hello Sublation Media viewers, welcome to part 2 of the Popular Show's interview with Alex Lee Moyer. For part 1, click below to the Popularity Media YouTube channel.
The other clip I had from that John Ronson series is Alex Jones himself making the exact critique that you just referred to, but making it of David Icke, which I think is kind of interesting.
We have a lot of different producers. You just get tired of the real meat and potatoes, the real issues. So he's gone for all the ridiculous Hollywood stuff of David Icke and the blood-drinking lizard people. So what does David Icke do? He talks about the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, these global elitists, these power structures, all real, all true, all demonstrated by bills and executive orders and prime ministers and premiers and presidents. All real meat and potatoes, something you can bite into, something that is easily demonstratable. And then you've got David Icke at the end of all this. He says, by the way, they're blood-drinking lizards.
Who's going to have the guts to stand up on a stage and say that reptiles run the world? I mean, who's going to do it? No one's ever going to do it. We're never going to find out, are we?
But can I say that about Alex Jones now, though? That I've said that a lot of this kind of anti-establishment attitude that's critical of official versions of events and starts from a position of skepticism about what health companies, the government are saying, that this is valuable. But then as soon as you start talking about Sandy Hook being actors, then you've ruined it. Is there a kind of way in which this is built into the kind of argument or presentation that Alex Jones does, that the argument that he was able to make against David Icke back in the day is now, one that it can be made against him, that right. He himself has been dragged into distracting from what's valuable in his argument?
Yes, you could definitely say that. Although, this just, man, like how different everything would be if it wasn't for that Sandy Hook moment. I mean, the thing is also this though, Alex, he's not really as out there as David Icke, and he, for instance, he's always at the very beginning he gave QAnon a little bit of. He interfaced with it a little bit, but then he kind of quickly decided that it was stupid. And then he became very vocal about the fact that he thought that it was like a psyop and a distraction. And Alex, I think, still at his heart sort of, and you can especially tell in that clip from back then, he could have been mainstream. He could have gone mainstream. Yep. And I think part of him would still, would like to do that. I don't think he has a way back at this point, although maybe he does. I don't know. But he's definitely not one to, he's never really made claims about that many. Well, I don't know. I will say he's been pushed further and further to the margins. And when you get caught in a bubble like that, maybe, you're a lot more apt to sort of lose your way from time to time. And I think that has happened with him.
There's an intriguing moment when Joe Rogan is interviewing him, and again, I was really struck in your film to see footage from 9/11 itself, where he already knew Joe Rogan then; they were already in conversation, and that was very interesting. But this is after his deplatforming, and I just drop another clip which sort of fits with what you've just said about that kind of question of like what's the road back to a mainstream kind of argument about these sort of questions that he habitually raises. I think this is quite instructive.
Notice they tried to impeach Trump just 9 months ago for stuff in Ukraine because whatever they are worried about, they project. Okay, so Trump doesn't have Russia connections. Trump doesn't have those connections. Trump doesn't have those outside connections. You can't buy him. He doesn't have lobbyists. The problem is he then has family and people around him that basically become lobbyists for themselves, everyone around him in his cabinet and everyone that works there, even down to mid-level people, are now getting multi-million-dollar contracts for companies like AT&T and stuff just to even mention something to the president.
But hold on, but before you go any further, you said AT&T. Has it been proven that it's AT&T, or are you just saying AT&T like companies, like
Let's
large
just say,
companies?
I'm not saying AT&T is bad. I think AT&T is overall a good company.
But is AT&T doing something bad?
No, I was mentioning that as a Fortune 500 company.
Okay, but it's not AT&T.
No, it's not AT&T.
So we shouldn't say that. See, this is why you need someone that's like a fact checker next to you.
No.
Going, slow down.
The media will say I'm wrong
right
about that, but okay.
But
no, hold on. His personal lawyer, the one that ended up going to jail, actually,
Michael Cohen.
Michael Cohen was getting money from AT&T. Go ahead and pull it up. I mean, I was just trying to give you a gestalt, quick analysis.
But I just want to. I've told you before, what you really need on your show is like a legit journalist who's right next to you with a laptop going, Alex, hold on, just slow down.
But I think you're right about that because
you get so much right, but when you get something wrong, that's what people
what you gotta understand is
AT&T confirms it paid Trump lawyer Michael Cohen's company.
Yeah. No, I remember that.
See, Joe, they're always saying that I'm making stuff up. They're lying.
Right.
Now, every once in a while, my memory used to be photographic, but from everything I've done, it's not as good as it used to be. It moves really quick, okay? So when I'm saying stuff, it's just data knowledge, okay? And then I can okay, yeah, did I say that? Yeah, it's real. Check it out.
See, I love that. So
That's
I know I'm throwing clips at you here, but I love that because that sort of tells the whole story for me. That first of all, Rogan says exactly what Alex Jones said about David Icke back in the day. That he gets things right and he takes it so far, but then he goes too far and he says the things that aren't unverifiable, and he needs a fact checker there. And of course, we watching it are thinking, yeah, but that wouldn't work because the whole presentation is that it's just him sort of saying things off the top of his head.
No, it would
and
ruin
then,
the show.
Then there's the next twist, which is he was right even about the thing that Rogan was fact checking him on, and that is so common that all of the stuff that that any of us could say off the top of our head that was some bullshit he was saying, actually it turns out there's a kind of link to something that's true. And maybe someone will say, yeah, but it's distorting the truth. Yeah, but you didn't even know the truth it was distorting.
Right. And that's something that makes it really hard to go out and do interviews about him. It's because people have this mantra about him of saying, oh, well, he peddles disinformation, disinformation, or, he's right. And unless I had I would need a massive sheet of statistics and facts and everything to go and cross check everything. But the truth is I don't even feel comfortable, saying, I think that he knows a lot more than I do. And what I was trying to do with the film was to convey the spirit of which he's leading his life. And that's what I was trying to do, and I'm not I'm not a wonk like he is. So it feels weird for me to just go and kind of blindly go along and agree with people just so I can stay within my comfort zone. That he's a disinformation spreader and he's a he's a bad guy or he's a great guy. It's just everybody's feelings are so strong about him emotionally that there's a lot of pressure to just go along with whoever you're talking to about him. Kind of, if that makes sense. But none of that was really in my head when I was making the film, so it's it's challenging.
I want to get into some nuts and bolts because I think it's super interesting. The documentary process is super interesting. How long did it take? And I mean, I'm not to get into your editing hours and all that stuff because I mean just doing small scale video on my own in different sort of realms. I know how much time that takes, but was this recorded over a year or 2 years? How did that go?
It was shot. We shot it over the course of about a year, and then I spent about 8 months or so editing it, and then there was a lot of kind of red tape, licensing, insurance, and of course, when you do a film like this, you need to be careful to cross your T's and dot your I's and make sure everything's cool so that if, John Ronson calls you and wants to take your movie out. Not that he did that. He hasn't said anything. But I'm just as an example, I'm dealing with other people's footage. I'm dealing with, music that I have to license and score and blah 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 blah. So it took about 2 years from start to finish, and then it also took some time to convince Alex to do the movie at the beginning, because he definitely didn't know who I was. So yeah, and even still, we're still promoting the movie, and I'm probably gonna have to go and shoot something with him for the Blu-ray. So we're still doing it.
So I got a question. I asked one of my sort of like my internet oracle friends, and she's a friend. She's my default friend, if you will, Catherine D.
Oh yeah,
And
she's my friend too.
and
Great
I
person.
said, what would you ask Alex in this situation? And she came up with a great question. And she said, if you could do it over again and you had unlimited budget and unlimited time, what would you do differently with this documentary?
Well,
I mean, it's not a fair question, I don't think, but she's
well,
like,
I can think of little moments in Alex's career and his story that I wish I would have worked into the film, like his support of Ron Paul, for instance. But the biggest obstacle to the film, and also though, okay, hold on, let's start over. So I worked as an editor for a lot of years before I was a director, and so I got a chance to work with a lot of directors on documentaries, and I saw a lot of people lose their way and lose their movies in the process of not knowing when to put something down, and wanting to shoot forever and wanting to raise money forever and wanting to, and then you get this interview and that means you can get that interview. And then, wait, hold on, there's going to be a Sandy Hook trial. I got to keep shooting so I can get that trial. And, oh no, wait, there's going to be a J6 commission. And, you really can just keep going forever, especially with somebody like Alex. And I wish that in some ways that I had been able to build more trust with him faster, because who knows what else I could have unearthed about him and his life and interesting details about his personality. But I also think that on films like this, you should just be content to let the film sort of take on a life of its own and set parameters for yourself, and you can just let it be its own thing. So I don't ever really have any regrets about my films, genuinely. I'm like a real turn and burn kind of person, and I just feel grateful that I can even make it from start to finish. But I don't really agonize over my edits, and I just know that the most important part to getting through a big project like this is to keep your enthusiasm up. And when your enthusiasm starts to taper off, you are in danger of making sort of poor creative decisions. So when it felt like it was over, and the other thing is this, I shot, I was shooting on January 6th, and then I was, sort of continuing to shoot after January 6th, and it just felt like, we were sweeping up the prom glitter a little bit. Like I felt that feeling like, okay, that was sort of the big thing of the movie. And even though I kept shooting for 4 months after that, I didn't put that footage. There's a lot of footage for this movie that I just went back and looked at, and I was like, spiritually, this feels like the end of the movie. So this is going to be the end of the movie. But if I could have changed anything, I would have maybe been able to build up a rapport with him faster. But of course, he doesn't have a ton of bandwidth in his life, and so stuff like that, it takes time. But I'm proud of what we were able to accomplish, and of course, by the end, we're friends now. And if I ever want to use him as a cameo in a movie in the future, I certainly will be able to call in that favor.
I made the comparison of those earlier kind of movies about some strange charismatic individual who takes it too far. One kind of distinctive thing about this, which distinguishes it from those kind of predecessors, and also from the other people who have worked on either Alex or similar people from that kind of outside sphere of politics, either John Ronson or Louis Theroux. The distinctive thing is that you don't appear in the movie. You don't put your voice in the movie. We never get that Louis Theroux moment of, I was beginning to wonder if Alex was being fully honest with me. You never kind of get that sort of distance. It's an experience of watching, well, more than 2 hours of this kind of almost ambient footage of kind of jumping between this kind of wonderful like visual presentation of the world around Alex, historical footage of Alex talking now. Some of the reviews have sort of said that this is that this deprives of us of having a kind of critical guide to sort of seeing Alex outside his own representation of himself. But what sort of drove that decision, or how would you justify even aesthetically that approach to documentary making?
I never even thought about putting myself in any of my movies. It's a distraction, I feel. And I don't think that I'm so great that I need to be in my movies, or I need the audience to be so acutely aware of me at all times. I mean, I'm already shooting the movie, directing the movie, editing the movie, producing the movie. Do I need to be in the movie too? I mean, no. So, and also, I don't really like that kind of attention. And while I do acknowledge the important part and the place in the canon of documentary filmmaking that John Ronson and Louis Theroux have, I mean, that's like classic, BBC style documentary filmmaking. One of the purposes that it serves for them to put themselves in the movie is sort of like a stopgap measure, as if to say, I'm the other. I'm not Jimmy Savile. I'm Louis Theroux.
Yeah.
I'm not Jimmy Savile. So just so you know, I'm right there with you, audience. And that's good. And I see the utility in that. But I want to do something that is more immersive. And I really want to put people in the shoes of my subjects. And I think that what I'm doing is a lot more on par with something that, say, the Maisels brothers would do, or like Terry Zwigoff or something. So that's what I'm more interested in, and I really want to put people in that place. And I also don't really especially love the sound of my own voice. So I don't want to have to be listening to that in a movie theater. I just want to be able to enjoy the fruits of my labor without thinking about myself.
Well, we do, and I think our listeners do as well. What about Alex's audience? How far the film is so focused on Alex himself? I wonder how far you got to know his fans, people who listen to him, because part of the thing about the Sandy Hook issue or affair is it wouldn't even be a problem if it wasn't for that like very committed mass audience that Alex Jones has, where the outer fringe of it, as it were, the people who, well, I'm speaking in kind of classic Freudian terms as opposed to medical diagnosis terms, people who are psychotic in the sense that they want to see everything outside themselves as connected, and so are very drawn to this kind of conspiracist discourse, and therefore see themselves as justified in harassing the parents of the Sandy Hook victims. So, I mean, to my knowledge, InfoWars wasn't doorstepping those parents particularly. The problem was ordinary listeners to Alex Jones's show were doing that. Well, I'll hold back from making further reflections on what I think the audience is. How far did you see those people or get to understand them?
Well, I spent a fair amount of time shooting Alex, obviously, in the protests following the election here, the populist protests in favor, in support of Donald Trump, and which consisted mainly of people who thought that there had been an instance of election fraud. There were several marches out in D.C. There weren't, and of course the media wasn't covering them then. There were, millions of people going to those marches. I mean, it was bigger than any Coachella I ever went to as a young person, that's for sure. And I never saw an instance of violence. The people were very friendly. Now, with regards to talking about quote unquote, info warriors, and whether they're like a bunch of like, um, crazy people that go and stalk people. I could say the same thing of like the average, of many NPR listeners in America right now who go and stalk Brett Kavanaugh at his home and try to kill him, or you know, or who engage in an entire summer of violence. And in 2020, the audience is it's just simply political. There's a lot of elitism that goes into the way that people characterize people that listen to InfoWars. I actually think that a lot of different kinds of people listen to InfoWars. They just don't really talk about it because it's considered, sort of socially unacceptable if you're in New York or LA. But it's certainly not unacceptable if you're living in Texas or if you're living in Middle America. And there's a lot of, I really can't speak. The people who work at InfoWars, for instance, are some of the nicest people I've ever met in my life, 100%. So, I mean, yes, there were some people in 2012 that went and harassed some of the Sandy Hook parents. But I don't think that that's indicative of people who identify as populists or Alex Jones fans in America. I just think that is, that's just the most highest profile representation of them in the mainstream media. And of course, there are crazy people all over the political spectrum.
Yeah, and as with the Canadian truckers protest, all the attention is on the one, the handful who have Nazi flags or whatever. Anyone who thinks of themselves on the left has experienced the exact same thing of the weird fringe getting taken as representative of anybody who questions the status quo. I mean, one thing that I think about it is that there's a sort of misunderstanding of how people experience truth. Can I say that? In this whole discourse of disinformation, it assumes that people out there are just idiot sheep who are molded by whatever voices come into their heads, when actually we have all kinds of relationships to the media that we consume. Robert Fowler, the philosopher, has pointed out that you go back to the ancient Greeks, who we think of as the great sort of masters of inventing philosophy and so on. Did they actually believe that Achilles couldn't overtake a tortoise? No, they had a more kind of varied and open idea of what belief meant. And I think that is true of quite a lot of people who enjoy watching Alex's magnificent Ziggy Stardust level performances on InfoWars. That it's not that they're simply hearing this message and taking it in, just as much as Alex has this kind of improvisational way of throwing together these different references from different sources and different recollections of things, as we saw in that Rogan clip. I think that people actually have quite a sophisticated relationship to that kind of performance, and they don't simply take what they've seen as fact any more than one would hope that the average CNN viewer takes what they've heard as straightforward fact that's not open to criticism or in some way contingent. So I think that quite a lot of the coverage of InfoWars and quite a lot of the way in which Alex Jones has been taken as the kind of figurehead of disinformation involves that anti-populist assumption of people's basic idiocy and openness to manipulation, but also quite a kind of vulgar idea of what belief means, when actually we all believe silly things or unlikely things or provisional things for more reasons than simply wanting to claim a fact for a straightforward utilitarian reason, if you see what I mean.
Right. Well, yeah, and I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, which is and I think now this is true also on the left and the right, which is at a certain point, it's not just about what he's saying, it's about how he makes people feel, and it's about people sort of getting swept up in the emotion of Alex and sort of living vicariously through him. And of course, if you watch his show, he often leads in with music from like, Star Wars or like 2001: A Space Odyssey, and he did something really genius, which is he sort of installed this sort of aesthetic of this epic struggle, and he creates meaning for people in their everyday lives. I think when they listen to it, I mean, you really do get the feeling like that you're listening to something very important, and you're tapping into something that's like for the ages. I mean, he does really sort of create that feeling, and of course, people don't really know what's true anymore because we're living through this like paradigm shift with the internet and being bombarded with information. And at a certain point, people just want to go with what feels right to them because it becomes so exhausting. And I think you see that all over the place, and that's why the media is able to get away with so much, manipulation of facts nowadays. And even if something becomes like debunked, like the Russia hoax, it still feels true to a lot of Democrats, and so they're just going to stick with it. And Alex is sort of, in some ways, also, he's people all over the spectrum are sort of guilty of that right now in this moment.
Yeah. Clearly, a lot of Democrats who, if you pin them down on the facts, would say, okay, there isn't a piss tape. Okay, Trump isn't really conspiring with Russia. But nonetheless, I say I believe that, and I believe that to signal my wider principles, that's got to be true of a lot of these Alex Jones viewers as well. They say, okay, I don't actually believe that fluoride makes people bisexual, etc. But I signal that I am not going to believe the official line on much more important things, and I think that is a perfectly legitimate position to take politically, and there's a great example of that I'm going to drop now from the trial itself.
Even within the past couple months, is your allegation that government officials are aiding in pedophilia, child trafficking, and the grooming of children, right?
You mean like what Jeffrey Epstein did with the Clintons?
Yeah, it's the best mic drop ever.
Yeah. I mean, you can pin people down on the details, and then you just reply, where are you on Jeffrey Epstein? When's the last time you factored that into your analysis of politics? I think that's a very vindicating moment in the whole thing, actually.
For most people, it doesn't work if you're on trial to just, I mean, that's something that Alex is very, very adept at, is deflecting from himself and sort of engaging in this like kind of whataboutism as a defense mechanism. And it is interesting, and you definitely do learn something. Yeah, I don't know how many of us could get away with just kind of shifting focus like that.
Can we grab a very topical issue? The FBI invasion. We're going to use that word of Trump's own residence. David, for our international audience, maybe you can get us up to speed on that news story. And then Alex, as someone who's spent so much time with Alex Jones and among his circle, I'm just curious about how they would be responding to this story, which in a curious way, has this amazing coincidence of occurring just as Alex's own trial is going on.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating sort of case, and like it probably deserves its own episode. But I would just say that about a week ago, law enforcement agents searched Trump's Florida home in the dead of night, in a very surprising sort of move to retrieve some documents they said were classified and that shouldn't have been removed from the White House and to Mar-a-Lago. there's a lot of complications and technicalities around the Presidential Records Act and what exactly can be classified and what is declassified by the actual order of the president. So that's a very like sort of gray area that is constantly be questioned, over time. There's been questions about things that Bill Clinton has done. There's been questions about George Bush, questions about Obama. This is not like something that hasn't come up before, but the Presidential Records Act came up in 1978. Was a reaction to sort of the the wantonness of the Nixon administration, et cetera, et cetera. But I was actually staying with a Republican uncle during this time who was watching Fox News, and he was quite surprised to hear that I actually thought this was a little bit of an overstep on the FBI. I thought it was just as a lifelong Democrat, which is interesting given the conversation. But I would say that like I thought it was an overstep. I thought it was bad for politics, and I thought it might be bad for the institutions involved to do this. I think that working in like more genteel means for this kind of issue is probably better. But we're seeing sort of lawfare become sort of the the coin of the realm and the way it works, especially in democratic politics. And I was quite shocked that it happened. And I haven't really understood the fallout of it yet. But they're saying it's relating to nuclear documents or something like that. But what that means, I don't know. But I don't think, just from my perspective, that this is going to make anyone less zealous about sort of the protection of Trump and sort of the idea that the deep state is after sort of dissident political figures.
Oh man, I mean, you want my take on it?
We want your take.
I think that the Joe Biden isn't going to run for another term. The security state is totally out of control. Nobody's at the wheel. It's a stunt for midterms. I'm pretty much in lockstep with whatever Fox News is saying. I hate to say that, but it's true. I just think that they've lost all their credibility at this point, and there wasn't really any reason for them to make as much of a scene about it. It's almost as if they want to create the extremists that they're dreaming of, because that's the only thing that's driving their platform right now on the left, is creating fear of these boogeymen on the right. And I just think it's tragic for this country that nobody's really at the wheel right now.
Yeah, I think that having Alex Jones available as somebody who could be represented as this totally unacceptable figure who had the ear of the president and could be in some way equated with Donald Trump, actually it's the best thing in the world from the point of view of this totally floundering Democrat administration, that they can have this kind of 2-for-1 where Alex Jones is on trial, and with the promise of even more in the January 6th Commission, that happening simultaneously with the FBI searching Mar-a-Lago. And also, as you say, that this kind of dimension of it that's there to create precisely the bogeyman and the enemy that it's claiming to police. But I mean, just the detail that when Trump claims that his passport was removed by the FBI, and then the official kind of release is, no, we don't have his passport. Then it turns out days later that they did take his passport. All of this it's almost like a kind of collaboration with the InfoWars sphere to kind of drip feed more and more material that sort of, it almost kind of vindicates precisely the Alex Jones position that is allegedly being shut down by all this policing of disinformation right now.
Right. Well, and I was saying last week at the height of the Sandy Hook sort of furor, when our Twitter page was being like bombarded with bots threatening me that I was going to go to jail for filming on January 6th, I said, well, just let's give it a couple more days until they drop the next item in the current thing news cycle for Democrats. I said, and there was one day where it was quiet and there wasn't a lot of news, and Alex had already got his verdict handed down, and I said, well, it's a little bit quiet. I bet something really big is going to be happening by the end of the night. And of course, that's when the Mar-a-Lago news dropped. And I'm not being conspiratorial. I'm just saying, it does seem like we're on a really steady drip of theatrics right now in our country. And it's just going to keep ramping up all the way until the election.
You're in a very kind of curious position bringing out this film of a guy who's already been removed from all platforms, and it's a calculation that anyone who interviews you has to make in terms of how they're going to release it and not have it taken down because of clips they've dropped or things they've said. And as I understand it, that sort of led you to hurrying out the Blu-ray release of the film. So maybe you could say something about like the particular like things that you've had to navigate in bringing out this film at all, and also how our listeners can get to hear us, and from your point of view, what the best way to see this film is.
Well, it's been a real mixed bag with releasing the film. I certainly assumed even from day one of shooting that we were going to have problems releasing it, and strangely, we have not had any problems releasing the film, even though there's all kinds of what could be flagged for disinformation in the film. It's on Amazon, it's on YouTube, it's on iTunes. It did very well, especially in pre-order on iTunes. It was number 2 after Top Gun for about a week. And it still is sort of going up and down in sort of the top 100 on iTunes, depending on what's going on in the news or what kind of appearances I make. So it's doing quite well, although we weren't allowed to buy any ad space for the film. We were flagged for hate speech on Google for promoting the film. We weren't allowed to buy any ads on YouTube. So we were barred from promoting the film by any conventional means online. And we were only really able to get word out through big accounts and influencers sort of tweeting out links to the trailer on Twitter. And that's had an amazing reach. And of course, there's a huge built-in audience for this film. And I'm not only just trying to appeal to people on the right with this film, but also, people in the, other filmmakers and people who just love movies, because I do think that there is something in it for everybody. But I'm actually pretty surprised at, I feel superstitious even saying it, but I'm very surprised at how smoothly it's gone so far. But, in promoting the film, it's almost like you've got cooties, and you could, I could just, infect anybody I talk to. And so there's always a little bit of guilt whenever I even, for instance, Matt Taibbi interviewed me and got a lot of blowback for it, and Glenn Greenwald came and did the Q&A at our premiere, and he got a huge amount of blowback for it. And I don't like to see these people that I admire taking flack, but of course they know what they're doing, and they know they've got a strong moral compass. So I really appreciate them for that.
Thomas Chatterton Williams got flack on Gawker.
He wasn't even there.
He wasn't even there, which is like very funny. Which I thought that was very funny. But it's that I think that if you've created such a buzz that not even being somewhere could cause you to get approbation by one of the biggest, dirtiest rags in the world. That's something.
And it was a blast, that premiere. Anybody should have loved to be there. It was truly one of the most memorable nights of my life. So I don't regret a thing.
Yeah.
Well, the Popular Show listeners are vaxxed, double vaxxed, and boosted for cooties, and they're not worried about hearing Alex Lee Moyer, a wonderful guest, the director of Alex's War. See it, you can see it everywhere. Go see it; it's amazing. Thanks so much for joining us on the show and giving us the other side of this vexing, peculiar, and terrifying figure of Alex Jones.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.